You remember her laugh, but not the reason. You remember the night she left, but not the day she arrived. There is a hollow in your memory where her face should be, yet the wound she carved remains sharper than anything real. She did not break you to forget you. She broke you to make herself feel unbreakable. And now, she dreams of the silence you left behind, a silence louder than any of her triumphs. She chooses the man who cannot be moved, the one who walks away not out of anger, but because he sees the stage for what it is, a play she cannot stop performing. She hates his stillness because it reminds her of death, not yours, but her own. You became a mirror she could not control, so she shattered it, and now she returns not for love but for revenge, or perhaps for meaning. You were not the one she wanted. You were the one who didn't want her back, and in her twisted worship, that's exactly why she can't forget. You did not seduce her. You did not chase her. You stood at the edge of her theater and watched her perform, and that, to her, was unforgivable. She wanted a witness, not an observer. She wanted devotion, not perception, but you looked at her too clearly, and that was the beginning of your undoing. You were not warm, you were not cruel, you were merely unmoved, and that is what made her bleed. You were not a man to her, you were a refusal, a riddle, a punishment from the gods. In a world of bending spines and open palms, you were the wall she could not scale. And so, she turned you into a mirror, one she could dance before, seduce, test, weep against. But you would not melt, you would not bend, you would not even break. And that is when she began to hate you. Not because you hurt her, but because you did not collapse into her hands like the others. Her whole life was built on proving that she could be chosen without giving herself, that she could remain untouched while being touched, that she could own a man's heart without ever offering her own. And then you came not asking, not begging, not even trying. You simply existed outside the hunger she knew how to manipulate. You did not orbit her sun. You walked by like a god passing through a mortal ritual. She danced louder, she laughed brighter, she spoke softer, but you would not kneel. This broke her in places no man had ever reached. You were the storm that never rained, the fire that refused to warm, the throne she could not decorate herself upon. And because she could not capture you, she rewrote you. She turned you into a monster in her mind, cruel, cold, arrogant. But even that gave her no peace, because the truth screamed underneath you did not reject her. You simply did not need her. And that is the one truth a woman trained in power play cannot bear. She needed to believe that your distance was punishment, that your stillness was a test, that your silence was a wound you didn't know how to express. But it wasn't. It was the absence of delusion. You had already seen through the game before it even began. You did not need her approval because you had already slaughtered the part of yourself that begged to be seen. And she had only ever known how to conquer men by giving them just enough to die for her. But you would not die. You would not even flinch. And so, she chose to shatter you, not to escape you, but to forget her own failure. She needed to destroy the mirror, not because it lied, but because it showed her reflection too clearly. You saw the cracks in her confidence, the fatigue beneath her seduction, the fear under her fire. And worse, you said nothing. You gave her no weapon to fight, no confession to hold over your head, no weakness to seduce. You simply watched her perform and refused to clap. This, to her, was cruelty beyond cruelty, the cruelty of not playing. So she tried to wound you. She compared, she provoked, she disappeared and reappeared, but your face remained unchanged. You did not rage, you did not chase, you did not flinch, you simply stood. as if her entire war was a ritual you had already seen before and grown tired of. To her, this was unbearable, because she was not used to failing. And in her mind, your indifference meant only one thing, that she was less than the others. And so she set out to prove the opposite, to find men who worshipped her, to post her joy, to laugh too loud, to smile too wide. All of it a theater to erase the one role she failed to win. But nothing cured the silence, because the mirror you remained unbroken, not because you fought her, but because you never entered the arena. And that is why she still dreams of you. She does not miss your voice. She misses the feeling of trying to provoke it. She does not miss your warmth. She misses the coldness she could never thaw. You were not a man to her. You were a test of her own divinity, and she failed. So she shattered the mirror, told herself it was cracked, told her friends you were narcissistic, told her pride you were a coward. But in the quiet, the silence that comes just before sleep, she remembers that look in your eyes, not hatred, not love, not need, just clarity. You saw her, not as she wished to be seen, but as she truly was. And you did not run, you did not kneel, you simply stood. And that is why she still returns to you, even if only in her mind. Because deep inside, she knows every man who kneels affirms her lie. But you, by walking away, confirmed the truth. She does not want you back. She wants herself back, the self she lost the moment you refused to worship her myth. She cannot forgive you for seeing her, and that is why she keeps looking back. She needs to know if you ever blinked, if you ever bled, if the mirror ever cracked, if the God she tried to tame ever wept, but you didn't. And that is the cruelty she will never escape. There are no words she fears more than the ones you never said. No expression more haunting than the one you never wore. She tried to sculpt your silence into meaning, to decode it as wounded pride or guarded love. But you gave her nothing, and in that void, something inside her began to unravel, because for the first time in all her performances, the stage was empty, the audience had walked away, and the spotlight turned inward. You see, the silence wasn't loud. It was surgical, cold, clean, and final, the kind of silence that does not punish, but reveals. And what it revealed was not you, it was her rehearsed power, her sacred manipulations, her soft cruelty disguised as charm, her calculated helplessness. All of it stood naked before your silence. And she realized she had no script for a man who doesn't need anything from her. She had power over the ones who begged, the ones who declared love too soon, the ones who offered their hearts in trembling hands and asked for crumbs in return. But you asked for nothing, you offered nothing, and still, you made her feel seen, not adored, seen. And that was the danger, because adoration she could devour, but being seen made her human, and she had spent her entire life learning how to avoid that. Your silence was not rejection, it was recognition, and it made her panic, because when you did not lean forward, when you did not chase, when you did not ask, she was left alone with herself, and the truth she met there was not the queen she imagined. It was the child afraid of being forgotten, terrified of being ordinary, desperate for applause, even if it meant bleeding on stage. She told herself you were cruel, that your indifference was violence, that your distance was a mask for secret longing, because it comforted her to believe you still played the game even badly. But deep down, she knew you were not playing. You had seen the strings, and you had walked off the stage. That silence wasn't absence, it was judgment. Not angry, not vengeful, worse, unimpressed. And so she began to kneel not out of love, but out of necessity. Not to offer you anything, but to reassemble her own image. Because if she could make you speak, even in hatred, it would mean she still had power. If she could pull a reaction, it would mean she still mattered. If she could make you flinch, she could prove that you were just another man, not a mirror. But you remained still, not because you won, but because you no longer cared for the prize. And she felt it. The kneeling began subtly, a message sent late, with no reply. A story posted, crafted only for your eyes. A question disguised as curiosity, then withdrawn before you could answer. All of it small offerings to the altar of silence. She said she had moved on. She told others she never looked back. But when she was alone, your absence echoed louder than any presence she had known. Because she had learned how to control desire, she had never learned how to endure insignificance. You didn't leave her broken, you left her unconfirmed, and that wound, the one where identity dissolves, is far deeper than heartbreak. Because she did not want your love. She wanted your surrender. She needed to know she could make you forget yourself, bend your principles, forsake your solitude, sacrifice your clarity. And when she couldn't, she began to kneel. She knelt before the image of you that only existed in her obsession, the image of a man who was close enough to burn her, yet far enough to escape. And in her kneeling, she stopped looking for a partner. She started looking for vengeance. But how do you punish someone who feels nothing? She posted laughter that wasn't real. She kissed lips she did not want. She filled her bed, but not her void. She tried to become untouchable because your touch had undone her. And the more she tried to erase your image, the deeper it carved itself into her. Not because of what you did, but because of what you didn't do. You did not console her pain. You did not rescue her from herself. You let her fall not to hurt her, but because you knew the role must end for the soul to speak. And she hated you for that. Because every time she looked into the mirror you left behind, she saw not your absence but her own reflection. The silence did not just make her kneel, it made her confess, not to you, but to herself, that she had worn the crown too long, that she had forgotten how to bleed without applause, that her throne was made of bones, not love, and that the only man she could not possess was the one who never tried to possess her. This is what broke her, not loss, but exposure, not heartbreak, but the collapse of illusion. You were not her soulmate. You were the death of her myth, the god who arrived not with gifts, but with silence. And still she returns, not for you, but for the echo, the possibility that maybe you once cared, that maybe your silence was pain, that maybe beneath the mask there was a man who almost fell, and so she kneels, not taught in devotion, but in interrogation, needing to know if her failure was final, if the mirror will ever crack, if you will ever look back. But you won't, and that, more than anything, is why she remains kneeling, not because she loves you, but because she cannot undo what she saw in your stillness, a truth she spent her whole life trying to outrun. She does not visit your memory because she misses you. She visits it like a crypt, not of love, but of the illusion she buried when you walked away. In that silence, she lit the candles herself, arranged the flowers, spoke prayers you were never meant to hear, not to summon you back, but to keep something dead from rotting. Because if the grave remains untouched, then maybe the dream still breathes beneath it. But she knows better. You were never the one she loved. You were the altar where she lost her godhood. And yet, she returns, not for warmth, not for closure, but because the wound has become sacred, the ache, a kind of proof. In a world where every man eventually crawls back, pleads, breaks, your absence is the only thing she cannot rewrite. And so she kneels again, not before your body, but before the phantom of who she was when you refused her. A girl cloaked in fire who thought she was untouchable until your silence named her bluff. She told herself stories, that you were emotionally stunted, that you were secretly in love and too proud to admit it, that you feared intimacy, and she had gotten too close. But time revealed the truth in layers she couldn't deny. You didn't pull away because she was too much. You walked because she was too predictable, and she could survive being unloved but not being ordinary. That is the truth she never told anyone. You were the first man who saw her script and refused to audition. She changed costumes, flipped roles, from seductress to martyr to queen to orphan. She wept in riddles. She whispered promises. She punished and forgave and punished again. But none of it moved you. Not because you were heartless, but because you were finished with the theatre. She does not cry for what was. She mourns what never surrendered, the power she never earned, the control she couldn't keep. Because every man before you had eventually knelt, and when they did, she pitied them, but you stood and left. Not in anger, not in rage, not even in grief. You left like a man who had simply remembered something more important. That is what she can never forgive. Because in leaving, you made her reflect not on love, but on leverage, not on heartbreak, but on performance, not on you, but on herself. You did not just vanish from her life. You pulled her curtain down, and there, on that exposed stage, she stood alone, not powerful, not desired, not divine. Just a woman playing a part that no longer fooled anyone, especially herself. And still, she dreams. She dreams of meeting you again, not to reignite, but to rewrite. In her fantasy, you admit it, that you were afraid, that you've been watching from afar, that no one ever compared. She doesn't need you to suffer. She only needs you to regret, because your regret would mean she won. That, in the end, her beauty still bent something eternal in you. But you don't regret. You remember her the way a traveler remembers a city they once passed through, strange, bright, beautiful, but never home. You were not built to orbit. You do not belong to kingdoms ruled by touch and tension. You were born for something quieter, something crueler, truth without need. And she was not a lie. She was simply a distraction, one you no longer pay for. And that is why she still waits at the grave. Because if even one moment could be exhumed, one kiss, one word, one hesitation, then maybe the god she couldn't conquer was just a man who almost cracked. But you didn't. Not even once. And so the grave remains sealed. Not by death, by indifference. She has loved, since you, but never again from the throne. With every man, she remembers the fall, the exact moment you didn't kneel, the way your silence folded her world in half, the way your eyes looked through her, not past her, but through, as if she were glass, and not the kind that reflects, the kind that shatters. You were not better than her. That's what makes it worse. You were simply elsewhere, farther in, beyond the field where she planted her games, beyond the temple where she demanded devotion. You had already seen the bones beneath beauty. You had already tasted the poison beneath praise, and she still believed her smile was a sword. You disarmed her by never drawing your own. And now, years later, she speaks of you with that strange mix of venom and reverence. Not because you harmed her, but because you undid her spell. She tells herself she survived you, but survival implies a battle, and you never fought her. That is what haunts her, that you let her win nothing, not even your hatred. And so the grave remains. It is not covered in dust. It is not forgotten. It is clean, sacred, polished. Like a museum of failure no one else is allowed to enter. She tends to it privately, often, with the care of a priestess guarding her last myth. Because in that grave is not just you, it is the version of herself she cannot resurrect. The one who was sure she could always win. She watches you from time to time, from a distance, socially, digitally. She notices the stillness in your eyes, the refusal to play, the way women reach for you and retreat, and she tells herself you must be broken, lonely, cursed, because that is easier than admitting the truth. You are free, free in a way she has never known. You are no longer seduced by performance, no longer moved by beauty's bargain. You have buried the part of yourself that needed to be seen, and in doing so, you became the thing she both craves and cannot endure. A mirror with no reflection, and now the grave is hers alone. She whispers to it, prays to it, even blames it, but she cannot leave it, because to leave would be to accept that your silence was not an act of cruelty, but of clarity, that your walking away was not a reaction, but a return to yourself, and that is the one place she still cannot go. So she waits, and the grave waits with her. But you never look back. One day, she will walk by that grave and not feel anything. Not sorrow, not rage, not longing. Just silence, the same silence you left her with. But until then, she will polish the headstone and call it closure. She will speak to the wind and pretend it answers. She will kneel before a past that was never hers to hold. And you will not know, because your knowing is over, and hers has just begun. In the distance, a door creaks where no building stands. A name is whispered that was never spoken aloud, and the stage long abandoned still echoes with a single footstep that never returned.